Between 11:23 p.m. on November 8th and 6:15 a.m. on November 9th, 1997, 16 people were eliminated across Stone County, Arkansas. All adults, all family members, cousins connected through marriage and blood going back 4 generations in the Ozark Mountains. The method was surgical, hunting rifles fired from positions these men had used for deer since childhood, ambushes on dark county roads, eliminations at deer camps and trailers, scattered across 607 square miles of unforgiving terrain. The perpetrators weren't rival gangs or cartel enforcers or even enemies in any traditional sense. They were the Macklin family, a father and his 5 sons moving through the November fog like the deer hunters they'd always been, methodically erasing everyone connected to a single act of disrespect. The Arkansas State Police would later classify it as the deadliest family massacre in state history, worse than anything seen in the violence of Reconstruction or the timber wars of the early 1900s. But the motive wasn't inheritance money, wasn't a methamphetamine operation, wasn't even a generations-old blood feud passed down from great-grandfathers who'd killed each other over Civil War loyalties. It was a 1989 Ford F-250, teal green with a tan interior, borrowed in June of 1995 and never returned. And one man's unshakable belief that in the Ozark Mountains, a borrowed item unreturned was theft, disrespect given publicly, demanded an answer written in blood, and sometimes protecting your honor meant destroying everything else. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. Stone County, Arkansas, sprawled across 607 square miles of some of the most isolated terrain in the Ozark Mountains in 1997. The population stood around 11,000 souls, down from 14,000 in 1980, when the timber industry still offered steady work. The county seat, Mountain View, held barely 2,500 people who knew each other's business, each other's family trees going back to the 1840s, and each other's grudges with the kind of intimate detail that only comes from generations of proximity. Other towns, Timbo, 56, Marcella, weren't really towns at all, just wide spots on state highways where a gas station and a post office marked human habitation. The terrain was unforgiving. Steep ridges covered in oak and hickory forest, rising to elevations around 2,000 feet. Narrow valleys called hollers where creeks ran cold and clear over limestone. Roads that turned from asphalt to gravel to dirt as you got farther from anything resembling civilization. November in the Ozarks meant temperatures dropping to 38 degrees Fahrenheit at night, rising to maybe 45 by afternoon if the sun broke through the clouds. The air smelled like wood smoke from stoves and fireplaces, wet leaves rotting on the forest floor, and the particular dampness of fog that settled in the hollers every morning and didn't burn off until noon if it burned off at all. The sound of the place was constant drizzle on tin roofs, distant chainsaws cutting firewood for winter, the occasional crack of a rifle during deer season, and every so often the rumble of a pickup truck grinding up some impossible grade in low gear. But 1997 was a devastating year for Stone County. The timber industry that had sustained these mountains for over a century had collapsed Under mechanization and corporate consolidation, mills that had employed hundreds now sat abandoned, their machinery rusting in the rain. Unemployment hovered around 35%. For men who'd grown up believing that hard work in the woods guaranteed survival, watching the economy collapse felt like a betrayal of everything their fathers and grandfathers had promised them. Raymond Earl Macklin was 56 years old that November, though people who knew him said he looked closer to 65, weathered by years in the timber industry and 2 tours in Vietnam that had demanded more than any 19-year-old should have been asked to give. He stood 6 feet even, weighed 195, most of it lean muscle built from decades of physical labor, cutting timber, running chainsaws, loading logs onto trucks in all weather. His face was tanned leather, deep lines carved around his eyes from squinting into sun and smoke, a thick scar running from his left ear down to his collarbone, a souvenir from a Viet Cong grenade fragment that had missed his carotid artery by less than an inch during the Tet Offensive in 1968. His hands were massive, knuckles swollen from old breaks that had never set quite right, calluses so thick he could grab a hot coffee pot without flinching. When he shook your hand, you felt strength there, but also damage. The accumulated toll of 56 years, lived hard in a place that demanded everything and gave back just enough to survive. Every morning, Raymond woke at 5 a.m. in the house his grandfather had built in 1923. On 80 acres of Ozark hillside, made coffee in a percolator that had belonged to his mother, and sat at the kitchen table smoking hand-rolled cigarettes while he planned his day. He didn't talk much in those early hours, just sat, smoked, drank coffee so strong it could strip paint, and thought about what needed doing. By 5:45, he'd be out the door, checking on his small sawmill operation, making sure his sons who worked with him knew which jobs needed finishing, which timber needed hauling. He'd married Linda Sue Garrett in 1970, right after he came home from Vietnam with nightmares. And that scar with the particular kind of damage that comes from watching friends die for reasons nobody back home seemed to understand or care about. They'd had 5 boys. Clayton was 34 now, married with 3 kids, back from Desert Storm with his own nightmares. Marcus was 32, quieter than his older brother, but just as capable with a rifle. Daniel was 30, still trying to figure out who he was beyond being Raymond Macklin's son. Joseph was 28, the best tracker in the family, could follow a wounded deer through terrain that would lose anyone else. Thomas was 26, the youngest, still believing the future held something better than Stone County's slow death. Walter James Prichard was 52 years old that November, Raymond Macklin's cousin through marriage, connected through the complicated web of family trees that defined the Ozarks, where everyone was related to everyone else if you went back far enough. Walter stood 5 feet 9 inches, built thick and solid with a barrel chest and arms like tree trunks from 40 years of timber work, his beard gone mostly gray, though his hair still held some of its original brown. He had a loud, friendly voice normally, the kind of man who could tell stories that kept a room laughing, who remembered everyone's name and asked about their families, who'd loan you his equipment if you needed it. At least he used to. Walter lived 3.5 miles from Raymond's property, up a gravel road that turned to mud when it rained, on land his grandfather had homesteaded in 1892. He had 6 sons, Dale, Michael, Robert, James, Christopher, and Andrew. ranging in age from 34 down to 22, and 2 daughters who'd married and moved to Little Rock, escaped Stone County's economic collapse for jobs that paid actual money. The Prichard compound consisted of Walter's main house, 3 trailers where his sons lived with their families, a barn that had seen better days, and enough broken-down vehicles and equipment scattered across the property to stock a junkyard. For decades, the Macklins and the Prichards had worked together, shared equipment when money was tight, helped each other with timber harvests, showed up when someone needed a barn roof repaired or a truck pulled out of a ditch. That was how it worked in the Ozarks. Family helped family. Neighbors helped neighbors. Because the alternative was watching everyone sink alone. But the economic collapse of the 1990s had changed things. Jobs became scarce, money became scarcer, and the unspoken rules about borrowed equipment started to fray. A chainsaw borrowed for a weekend might come back a month later, damaged. A truck loaned for a timber haul might return with a cracked windshield and no apology. Debts went unpaid because nobody had money to pay them. Grudges formed over things that would have been forgiven in better times. Still, they were family, connected by blood and marriage, and 100 years of shared history in these mountains. Until they weren't. June 12th, 1995, a Thursday afternoon when temperatures hit 87 degrees and the humidity made breathing feel like drowning, Walter Prichard drove his battered 1978 Chevy C10 up Raymond Macklin's driveway and found Raymond working on his sawmill, replacing a blade that had cracked during the morning's work. Raymond straightened up when he heard the truck, wiped sweat and sawdust from his face, waited. Walter climbed out, looking uncomfortable, which should have been Raymond's first warning. "Ray, I got a problem," Walter said. "Got a timber job up near 56. Good money. But my truck's transmission is shot. Been meaning to fix it, but haven't had time. Need to haul about 3 cords of oak. And I was wondering, hoping really, if I could borrow your F-250 for a couple weeks. Get this job done, pay to fix my transmission, get you your truck back good as new." Raymond looked at his 1989 Ford F-250, teal green, tan interior, 351 Windsor engine, bought new in November of 1989 for $14,800, the only significant purchase he'd made in 20 years, besides his house. He'd driven that truck for 6 years, maintained it religiously, changed the oil every 3,000 miles, kept it clean, treated it like the valuable tool it was. "Family helps family," Raymond said finally. 2 weeks, Walt. I need it back in 2 weeks. I got my own timber jobs coming up." Walter's face broke into a relieved smile. 2 weeks, I promise, Ray. I appreciate this more than you know. You're saving my ass here." Raymond handed over the keys, watched Walter drive away in his truck, told himself it was fine. Family helped family. Walter would return it on time like he promised. 2 weeks became 3. Raymond called. Walter said the job was running long, just a few more days. 3 weeks became a month. Raymond drove by Walter's property, saw his F-250 parked there, saw Walter's oldest son Dale driving it, told himself to be patient. Walter would return it soon. A month became 6 months. Raymond's patience started wearing thin. By October 15th, 1997, 16 months after Raymond Macklin had loaned his 1989 Ford F-250 to Walter Prichard for what was supposed to be 2 weeks, Raymond's patience had transformed into something colder and harder than anger, something that lived in his chest like a stone and made sleeping difficult and thinking about anything else nearly impossible. He'd asked for the truck back 11 times over those 16 months, polite at first, then firm, then with an edge in his voice that people who knew Raymond understood meant he was reaching the end of whatever tolerance he'd been extending. Each time Walter had an excuse, always delivered with that apologetic tone that somehow made it worse. The transmission on my Chevy still ain't fixed, Ray. Just give me another month, or I got this big timber job coming up, need your truck for it, can't do it with mine, broke down. Or the most insulting one, come on, Ray, it's just a truck. Why are you getting so worked up about it? But it wasn't just a truck, had never been just a truck. And the fact that Walter couldn't or wouldn't understand that fundamental truth made Raymond's jaw clench every time he thought about it. That Ford F-250 represented everything Raymond had worked for, the only new vehicle he'd ever owned, bought with money he'd saved for 3 years, a tool that let him run his small sawmill operation, haul timber, make a living in an economy that was killing everyone who wasn't already dead. More than that, it represented a promise made and a promise broken, a handshake deal that should have been sacred between family members, between men whose grandfathers had known each other, who'd grown up in the same hollers, who understood that your word was supposed to mean something even when nothing else did. On October 15th, a Wednesday afternoon, when the temperature sat at 43 degrees and drizzle fell from gray skies that looked like they'd never seen sun, Raymond drove his backup vehicle, a 1976 Dodge Power Wagon with 200,000 miles and an exhaust leak that made his head hurt, to Walter Prichard's property. He found his F-250 parked next to Walter's barn, and what he saw made something break inside him that would never quite heal. The windshield had a crack running from the passenger side all the way across to the driver's side, spiderwebbing out from an impact point that looked like someone had thrown a rock, or maybe driven under a low branch without caring. The front bumper had a dent he didn't recognize, the kind you get from backing into something solid. The bed had scratches and gouges from what looked like loading equipment without using a tarp or pads to protect the paint. Raymond climbed out of the Dodge, walked around his truck slowly, saw an oil leak staining the gravel underneath, saw the driver's side mirror was cracked, saw that the interior through the window looked trashed, fast food wrappers on the floor, mud on the seats, the kind of neglect that comes from using something that isn't yours and not caring about keeping it nice. He stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just looking, feeling his hands open and close at his sides, feeling his breathing get shallow and fast the way it used to in Vietnam when incoming rounds started hitting close and you knew you had to make a decision between taking cover or returning fire. Walter came out of his house, saw Raymond standing there, and something flickered across his face. Not quite guilt, not quite fear, something in between. "Ray, I was going to call you," Walter started. Raymond cut him off. "You've had my truck for 16 months, Walt. 16 months for what was supposed to be 2 weeks. Walter's face hardened slightly, defensive now. I told you my transmission still ain't fixed. I need it for work. Family should understand that. Raymond pointed at the cracked windshield. You understand what you've done to it? The oil leak? The way it's been treated like a piece of garbage instead of a $14,000 vehicle I worked 3 years to buy? Walter's 3 oldest sons had come out onto the porch now, Dale, Michael, and Robert, all watching, all hearing this. And Raymond saw something in Walter's posture shift, saw him stand up straighter, saw him playing to an audience now, instead of having a conversation between family members. It's just a truck, Raymond, Walter said, louder than necessary, making sure his sons heard him. Why are you making this into a federal case? Just a truck you can replace. Raymond felt heat rise up his neck, felt his Vietnam training kick in. The ability to stay calm when everything in him wanted to explode. It's not about the truck anymore, Walt, Raymond said quietly, dangerously. It's about respect. It's about your word meaning something. It's about you borrowing something and promising to return it and then keeping it for over a year and treating it like garbage and acting like I'm the problem for asking for my own property back. Walter took a step forward, emboldened by his sons watching, by the need to not look weak in front of them. Maybe I'll give it back when I'm good and ready, Walter said. Maybe I won't give it back at all. What are you going to do about it, Ray? File a police report? Sheriff's 40 miles away and doesn't care about family disputes. You're just going to have to wait until I'm done with it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Raymond looked at Walter, really looked at him, saw a man who'd taken his generosity and twisted it into something ugly, who'd broken a promise and then mocked him for caring, who'd disrespected him in front of witnesses and seemed to think there would be no consequences. Raymond looked past Walter at the 3 Prichard sons and the porch, saw them smirking slightly, saw them enjoying watching their father stand up to Raymond Macklin, saw them treating this like entertainment instead of the serious breach it was. Raymond got back in his Dodge, started the engine, rolled down the window. I'm giving you until November 1st, Walt, Raymond said, his voice carrying across the yard clearly despite the rain. 17 days. You return my truck, we wash the windshield fixed, the oil leak fixed, cleaned inside, and we forget this happened. We go back to being family. Walter crossed his arms. And if I don't, then I come take what's mine, Raymond said. And you won't like how I do it. He drove away without looking back, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white, jaw clenched so tight he could feel his teeth grinding. And something in his mind, already calculating, already planning, already crossing lines he'd spent 56 years refusing to cross. Behind him, on Walter Prichard's porch, Dale Prichard laughed and said something to his brothers that Raymond couldn't hear but could imagine. And that laugh, that casual dismissal of a threat given by a man who'd survived 2 tours in Vietnam and had never in his life said something he didn't mean, that laugh sealed fates that hadn't been sealed yet, but would be soon. November 1st came and went, like a stone, dropping into dark water. No splash, no ripple, just the quiet understanding that a deadline had passed and nothing had changed. Raymond Macklin stood on his front porch at 4:30 p.m., watching the sun sink behind the ridge west of his property, watching shadows stretch across his 80 acres, and the Ford F-250 remained exactly where it had been for 16 months, parked at Walter Prichard's compound, 3.5 miles away, unreturned, unrepaired, a physical manifestation of disrespect that Raymond could feel like a weight on his chest every time he thought about it. No truck pulled up his driveway that day. No phone call came with an apology or an explanation. No Prichard brother appeared to make things right. Just silence and the slow understanding that Walter had made his choice, had decided that Raymond's deadline meant nothing, that Raymond's threat was empty, that Raymond Macklin at 56 years old was too old or too tired or too worried about consequences to actually do anything about being disrespected and robbed by family. Linda Sue appeared in the doorway behind him, drying her hands on a dish towel, her face showing the same worn beauty that had made him fall in love with her in 1969, when he'd been a scared 20-year-old, about to ship out to Vietnam, and she'd been an 18-year-old who'd promised to wait for him. "Maybe they don't have the money to fix it, Raymond," she said quietly. "Maybe Walt's embarrassed and doesn't know how to make it right." Raymond didn't turn around. "I don't care about the money for repairs," he said. "I care that he gave me his word and broke it. I care that he's been using my truck for 16 months like it's his. I care that when I asked for it back, he mocked me in front of his sons." Linda Sue was quiet for a long moment. "Then call the sheriff," she said. "Let the law handle it. Make a report, file charges if you have to, but let the legal system deal with it." Raymond finally turned to look at her. "Sheriff Tom Bradford is 43 miles away in Mountain View," he said. "By the time he drives out here, takes statements, files paperwork, if he even bothers doing anything at all because he knows this is a family dispute and he doesn't want to get involved, that truck will be stripped for parts or sold or driven into the ground completely. Besides," he paused, searched for words to explain something he'd understood since childhood but had never quite articulated. "You know how this works, Linda Sue. The law is for people who live where the law can reach. Out here, we handle our own problems. We always have. Mountain handles mountain." The phrase was old, older than Raymond, older than his father. Something passed down through generations of Ozark families who'd settled these hills in the 1800s and learned quickly that sheriffs and judges and courts were distant abstractions. That if your neighbor stole from you, or disrespected you, or broke his word, you either handled it yourself, or you learned to live as a man without honor. And living without honor in these mountains was worse than not living at all. Linda Sue's face went pale because she understood what mountain handles mountain meant, had grown up hearing the phrase, knew the stories of feuds that had lasted generations, of families that had killed each other over insults and broken promises and boundary disputes, knew that her husband was standing at the edge of a decision that would change everything and might destroy everyone. "Raymond, please," she said. "Think about the boys. Think about your grandchildren. Think about what this will do to them." "I am thinking about the boys," Raymond said, and his voice had gone quiet in the way that people who knew him understood meant he'd already decided, had already moved past the point of being talked out of whatever he was planning. What kind of man lets someone steal from him and does nothing? What kind of father teaches his sons that you can be disrespected publicly, that you can have your property taken and your word dismissed, and you just accept it because going through legal channels is easier than standing up for yourself? He looked out at his property, at the land his grandfather had worked, at the barn his father had built, at everything that represented 4 generations of Macklins who'd made their living in these mountains through hard work and keeping their word and demanding that others do the same. My daddy told me something when I was 15 years old, Raymond said. He said, "Son, in this world there are men and there are boys who grew tall. Men keep their word. Men protect what's theirs. Men don't let other men walk on them and smile about it. And if you let a man take what's yours and laugh about it, you might as well lay down and let the world use you for a doormat, because that's all you'll ever be." Raymond had tried to be reasonable, had given Walter 16 months of patience, had asked politely 11 times, had finally given a clear deadline with a clear consequence, had done everything that should have been necessary between men who understood how things worked. But Walter had chosen differently, had chosen to keep the truck, to ignore the deadline, to treat Raymond's threat as meaningless, and in doing so, had forced a choice that Raymond wished he didn't have to make but couldn't see any way around. Linda Sue went back inside. Raymond heard her crying in the kitchen but didn't follow. Knew there was nothing he could say that would make this easier. Knew she understood as well as he did that some decisions you make alone, because bringing others into them only spreads the weight without changing the outcome. He stood on that porch until full dark, smoking cigarettes. He rolled himself, watching stars come out one by one in a sky so clear you could see the Milky Way like a river of light, listening to the sounds of the Ozark night, owls calling, distant dogs barking, the creek running cold over limestone, all of it continuing like it always had, like it would continue after he was gone, indifferent to human problems and human choices, and the violence men did to each other over trucks and respect and broken promises. At some point during those hours, Raymond crossed a threshold he'd been standing at since October 15th, stepped over a line he'd spent 56 years refusing to cross, made peace with what he was about to become, what he was about to ask his sons to become, what he was about to do to 16 men who were family, who were cousins and nephews, and connected through marriage and blood, but who had chosen sides in a dispute that should never have happened, and now had to face consequences that seemed insane to anyone who didn't understand that in the Ozarks, honor and respect weren't abstract concepts. They were the foundation of everything, and when that foundation cracked, the whole structure came down. October 28th, 1997, a Tuesday evening, when the temperature had dropped to 39 degrees and fog rolled down from the ridges like something alive, Raymond Macklin gathered his 5 sons in his barn, the building that smelled like motor oil and sawdust, and the accumulated work of 3 generations. He'd called each of them separately, said only that he needed to talk, family meeting, 7 p.m., don't be late, and they'd all come because when Raymond Macklin called a family meeting in that particular tone of voice, you came. Clayton arrived first in his 1992 Ford Ranger, 34 years old, the oldest, with 3 kids waiting at home and a wife who knew better than to ask what this was about. Marcus came next, 32, quieter than his brother, but carrying the same solid build, the same weathered hands, the same understanding that family loyalty ran deeper than law or comfort or safety. Daniel showed up in a Chevy that needed new shocks, 30 years old, and still trying to figure out how to make a living in an economy that had killed everyone else's livelihood. Joseph arrived on a four-wheeler 28, the best tracker in the family, could follow a blood trail through conditions that would lose anyone else. Thomas was last, 26, the youngest, still young enough to believe the future might offer something better than Stone County's slow death, but old enough to know that belief was probably wrong. They gathered in the barn under a single work light that cast long shadows. 5 men, ranging from 26 to 34, all of them Raymond's sons, all of them understanding, without being told that what their father was about to say would be serious and probably dangerous and would require them to make choices they'd never imagined making. Raymond stood at his workbench, hands resting on wood his grandfather had planed smooth in 1925, and looked at his boys, saw himself in each of them, saw Linda Sue in the shape of their faces, saw 4 generations of Macklin blood that had survived poverty and war and economic collapse and every hardship these mountains could throw at them. "Walter's not returning the truck," Raymond said without preamble, without softening it. Just the flat truth, delivered like a hammer blow. "Been 3 days past my deadline. He's made his choice. He's decided my word doesn't mean anything, my property doesn't matter, and he can disrespect me without consequences." Clayton, the oldest, who'd served in Desert Storm, who'd come home in 91 with the same kind of nightmares his father had brought back from Vietnam, spoke first. "So we go take it back," he said. "Drive over there, load it on a trailer if we have to, bring it home. Simple." Raymond shook his head slowly. "It's not that simple anymore," he said. "It was never really about the truck, though I do want my property back. It's about what the truck represents. Walter borrowed it and promised 2 weeks. 16 months later, it's still there, damaged, treated like garbage. And when I confronted him about it, asked for it back, gave him a clear deadline, he mocked me in front of his sons. His boys laughed, Clayton. They laughed at me for caring about my own property, for expecting a man to keep his word." Marcus leaned against a support post, arms crossed. "What are you saying, Dad? What exactly are we talking about here?" Raymond was quiet for a long moment, gathering words for something he'd never said out loud before, something that once spoken couldn't be unspoken, would change the trajectory of all their lives in ways they couldn't fully understand yet, but would live with forever. "I'm saying," Raymond began slowly, "that sometimes in this life you reach a point where being reasonable doesn't work anymore. Where trying to do things the right way, the legal way, just gets you walked on, where the only language some men understand is force. I gave Walter every chance to make this right. 16 months of chances, a clear deadline, a clear warning. He chose to ignore all of it, chose to keep what's mine and mock me for caring." The barn was silent except for the sound of wind moving through gaps in the boards, the distant barking of a dog, the creak of old wood settling. "So what do we do?" Daniel asked quietly. Raymond looked at each of his sons in turn, saw them watching him, waiting for him to say what he'd called them here to say, what they probably already suspected but needed to hear spoken plainly. "We make an example," Raymond said. "We show people what happens when you steal from a Macklin and laugh about it. We show them that our word means something, that there are consequences for disrespect, that you can't just take what you want from us and expect to walk away smiling." He paused. "We eliminate the problem." The word hung in the air like smoke. Eliminate, a clinical term for something that wasn't clinical at all, a Vietnam word, a military word, a word that stripped away the humanity of what he was suggesting and made it sound like a tactical decision instead of what it actually was. Clayton straightened up from where he'd been leaning. "You mean Walter," he said. "We eliminate Walter." Raymond nodded. "And anyone who knows where that truck is, anyone who's been using it, anyone who's benefited from keeping it. All of them." Clayton's face showed no shock, no horror, just the calm acceptance of a man who'd been in combat, who understood that sometimes violence was the answer to problems that couldn't be solved any other way. "How many?" 16, Raymond said. "Walter, his 6 sons, his brother's 4, sons who've been using my truck for their own work, Walter's cousins who helped him with whatever timber jobs he claimed he needed my truck for, all of them. 16 men who know where my property is, who've been complicit in keeping it, who've disrespected our family." Joseph, the tracker, spoke for the first time. "Dad, that's..." He paused, searching for words. "That's a lot of people. That's most of the Prichard family." Raymond met his youngest son's eyes. "I know exactly what it is, Joseph. I've thought about nothing else for 2 weeks. Thought about prison, thought about dying behind bars, thought about never seeing your mother again, except through plexiglass on visiting days. Thought about my grandchildren growing up knowing their grandfather was a murderer. I've thought about all of it. And I keep coming back to the same question. What kind of man am I if I let this stand? What kind of father am I if I teach you that you can be stolen from and disrespected, and you just accept it because the alternative is hard?" Thomas, the youngest at 26, who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke. "There's got to be another way, Dad. We could, I don't know, steal the truck back, slash their tires, burn their barn, something that sends a message without this." Raymond looked at his youngest son with something like sadness. "I thought about all of those things, Thomas, but here's what I know. If we steal the truck back, they'll steal it again or steal something else, and we'll be right back here. If we burn their barn, they'll burn ours. If we slash their tires, they'll shoot our cattle. It escalates until someone does exactly what I'm talking about doing now. Except by then there might be more dead on both sides, might be women and children caught in crossfire, might be chaos instead of what I'm proposing, which is controlled, surgical, over in one night, done." Clayton walked to the workbench, stood beside his father. "You served in Vietnam," he said. "I served in Desert Storm. Between us, we know how to do this, how to plan it, how to execute it, how to make it quick and clean. The question is, are we really doing this? Are we really going to eliminate 16 men over a truck?" Raymond shook his head. "Not over a truck, son. Over respect. Over a man's word meaning something. over the principle that you can't steal from us and mock us and expect no consequences. The truck is it's just the thing that made it visible. The real issue is whether we're men who stand up for ourselves or men who let the world walk on us. Clayton was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. When? Soon, Raymond said. Deer season just started. Everyone's out in the woods, armed, moving around at odd hours. Won't seem unusual for us to be out at night with rifles. November 8th, Saturday night into Sunday morning. Gives us 10 days to prepare, to plan, to make sure we do this right. He looked at each of his sons. I'm not ordering you to do this. Each of you has to make your own choice. But I'm doing it with or without you. I've made my decision. I'm going to protect what's mine and punish the men who stole it. If you want to help, I need you. If you don't, I'll understand, but you can't talk me out of it and you can't tell anyone. This stays in this barn between us. The 5 sons looked at each other. Some silent communication passing between them that only brothers understand. Years of shared history and shared blood and shared understanding that family loyalty ran deeper than fear or morality or legal consequences. One by one, they nodded. Clayton first, the oldest, the combat veteran who understood what his father was asking. Then Marcus, solid and quiet. Then Daniel, still uncertain but unwilling to let his father do this alone. Then Joseph, the tracker. Finally Thomas, the youngest, who understood he was throwing away whatever future he might have had but couldn't see any other choice when his father and brothers had already decided. All right, Raymond said quietly. Then we plan this like a military operation. No mistakes, no witnesses, no one left who can testify. We do it quick, we do it clean, and when it's over, we don't run. We wait for the law to come, and we face what we did. His sons nodded, and in that barn, on that October night, 5 men crossed a line they'd spent their whole lives refusing to cross, made a decision that would destroy 24 families and mark Stone County forever, all because a truck borrowed for 2 weeks had been kept for 16 months, and respect had become more valuable than life itself. November 3rd, 1997, a Monday morning when frost covered the ground and the temperature sat at 34 degrees, Raymond Macklin began the practical work of preparing for mass murder with the same methodical attention to detail he'd brought to every significant task in his 56 years. He didn't need to buy new weapons because he and his sons already owned everything necessary, accumulated over decades of deer hunting in the Ozark Mountains, where every man had rifles and shotguns, the way city people had lawnmowers, necessary tools for putting food on the table and managing the land. Raymond's personal arsenal included his primary deer rifle, a Remington 730-06 that he'd owned since 1973, a Winchester Model 70 in .308 that had belonged to his father, and a Remington 870 shotgun in 12 gauge that he used for turkey hunting. Clayton owned 2 rifles, a Savage 110 in .30-06 and a Marlin lever action in .308, plus his military-issue Beretta 9mm pistol he'd brought back from Desert Storm. Marcus had a Browning bar in .30-06 and a Mossberg 500 shotgun. Daniel owned a Winchester Model 94 lever action in .30-30 and a Ruger 357 Magnum revolver he'd bought at a pawn shop in Mountain View. Joseph had his grandfather's Springfield .3 from World War I, still in perfect working condition, plus a Remington 700 and 270 Winchester. Thomas owned a Weatherby Vanguard in .30-06 and a Smith & Wesson .357. Between the six of them, they had enough firepower to outfit a small militia, and every weapon was legally owned, registered properly, familiar from years of use in the woods. But Raymond did need ammunition, more than they currently had stockpiled. So he drove to 5 different Walmart stores across 3 counties over 5 days, buying boxes of rifle cartridges and shotgun shells, spreading the purchases thin so no single store clerk would remember a man buying enough ammunition to fight a small war. Mountain View Walmart on Monday. Bought 3 boxes of .30-06 Federal Premium, 20 rounds each, 60 rounds total. Harrison Walmart on Tuesday. Bought 2 boxes of .308 Winchester, 20 rounds each, 4 boxes of 12-gauge buckshot, 5 shells per box. Melbourne Walmart on Wednesday bought 3 boxes of .30-30 Remington, 2 boxes of .357 Magnum, 50 rounds total. Batesville Walmart on Thursday bought 4 more boxes of .30-06, 2 boxes of .270 Winchester. Mountain Home Walmart on Friday bought 3 boxes of .308, 3 more boxes of 12-gauge. He paid cash every time, kept the receipts in a coffee can under his kitchen sink, some part of him still believing in documentation, improving he'd done things legally right up until the moment he didn't. 270 rounds of rifle ammunition, 60 shells of buckshot, enough to eliminate 16 men, several times over, with ammunition left for whatever contingencies might arise. On Tuesday evening, November 4th, Raymond spread United States Geological Survey topographic maps across his kitchen table, the detailed maps that showed every ridge and hollow in Stone County with elevation lines and creek beds and old logging roads, marked in faded ink. He'd been walking these mountains since he was 5 years old, knew them in daylight and darkness, in summer heat and winter ice. But planning required precision, required documenting what he knew instinctively. So his sons, who hadn't spent as many years learning the terrain, could understand the tactical situation they'd be operating in. He marked each Prichard property with a red X using a Sharpie marker. Walter's main house and compound on County Road 14, 3.5 miles from Raymond's property. Dale Prichard's trailer on County Road 22, 4 miles east. Michael Prichard's house on Highway 9 near Timbo, 8 miles north. Robert and James Prichard shared a property on an unnamed gravel road off Highway 66, 6 miles northwest. Christopher Prichard lived in a trailer behind his father Walter's place. Andrew Prichard, the youngest at 22, lived in Mountain View proper, 12 miles from Raymond's property. Then the cousins, the extended Prichard family, who'd been using Raymond's truck, who'd been complicit in keeping it, who'd laughed when they drove past in a vehicle that didn't belong to them. 4 cousins living at various properties scattered across northern Stone County, from the community of Marcella to the old mining area near Rush. Raymond marked escape routes in yellow highlighter, the county roads and state highways that connected the properties, the old logging roads that only locals knew about, the creek beds that could be followed in darkness if someone ran. He marked where each of his men would position themselves with blue circles, creating overlapping fields of fire, ensuring that no property had only one shooter covering it. Military tactics learned in Vietnam applied to the Arkansas Ozarks. Clayton stood beside him, studying the maps with the eye of someone who'd done urban combat in Kuwait, who understood how to clear buildings and manage multiple targets. "This is going to take coordination, Dad," Clayton said quietly. "We're talking about hitting multiple locations across 12 miles of mountain terrain in one night. We need communications. We need timing. We need to make sure nobody escapes to warn the others." Raymond nodded. "We hit them simultaneously," he said. 11:30 p.m. on Saturday. Everyone's home by then, settled in for the night. Deer season means nobody questions hearing gunshots. We use the old logging roads to move between properties, headlights off, vehicles we've checked and double-checked so nothing breaks down. 2 men per primary target, 1 man covering escape routes. We do Walter last, make sure he understands why this is happening before he dies. Clayton traced a route on the map with his finger. "Marcus and Daniel take Dale Prichard," he said. "Trailer on County Road 22, isolated, 1 access road. Should be straightforward. Joseph takes Michael Prichard's house. Good vantage point. From the ridge behind his property, Joseph can shoot from 300 yards, and Michael will never know what hit him. Thomas and I take Robert and James together. They live on the same property. We can handle both. You take Christopher at Walter's place. Then Walter himself. That leaves the 4 cousins. We do those after the primary targets are down. Clean up, make sure nobody's left. Who knows where your truck is?" Raymond listened to his oldest son plan multiple homicides with the clinical detachment of a military operation, felt pride and horror in equal measure. Pride that his boy was capable and competent and willing to stand with him. Horror that it had come to this, that he'd raised sons who could discuss killing family members like they were discussing a deer hunt. But this was the choice he'd made, the line he'd crossed, and there was no going back now, hadn't been since he'd called them to the barn 5 days earlier. Linda Sue appeared in the doorway, saw the maps spread across the kitchen table, saw the red X's and yellow highlighter and blue circles marking death, turned and walked away without saying anything. Raymond heard her in the bedroom, heard drawers opening and closing, heard her moving through the house like a ghost, present but separate, unable to stop what was coming but unwilling to participate in planning it. Wednesday and Thursday were spent on vehicle maintenance, checking oil levels and tire pressure and brake pads, making sure every truck and car they'd be using on Saturday night was mechanically sound, because breaking down between properties with bodies behind you and more targets ahead was not an option. Raymond serviced his Dodge Power Wagon, changed the oil even though it had only been 2,000 miles since the last change, checked every belt and hose, topped off all fluids. Clayton did the same with his Ranger. Marcus checked his Chevy S10. They worked in silence mostly, the comfortable quiet of men who'd worked together their whole lives, who didn't need words to communicate, who understood they were preparing for something that would end their lives as they knew them, but couldn't see any other path forward. On Friday, November 7th, they test-fired every weapon they'd be using, drove out to an abandoned quarry 15 miles from town, where locals had been target shooting for generations, where the sound of gunfire wouldn't alarm anyone or draw attention. Raymond fired 10 rounds from his Remington 700, confirming 0 at 100 yards, groups tight enough to put every shot in a 6-inch circle. Clayton fired his Savage, Marcus his Browning, Daniel his Winchester, Joseph his Springfield, Thomas his Weatherby. They shot until they'd confirmed every rifle was sighted properly, every shotgun patterned correctly, every handgun functioned without jamming. Then they drove home through the late afternoon, weapons cleaned and loaded and ready, men who'd spent their whole lives as law-abiding citizens about to become the worst mass murderers in Arkansas history. Friday, November 7th, 1997. The last normal day before everything changed forever. Started like 1,000 other November Fridays in Stone County had started, with frost on the ground and temperatures in the low 30s and men going about the business of trying to survive in an economy that had abandoned them years earlier. Raymond Macklin woke at 5 a.m. like he did every morning, made coffee in the percolator that had belonged to his mother, sat at his kitchen table smoking hand-rolled cigarettes and thinking about what tomorrow night would bring, about 16 men who would be alive this time tomorrow and dead 24 hours later, about the decision he'd made and couldn't unmake. Linda Sue came into the kitchen at 5:45, poured herself coffee without speaking, sat across from him at the table they'd shared breakfast at for 27 years. They didn't talk, just sat in the kind of silence that long-married couples can share. But this silence was different, heavier, weighted with knowledge of what was coming. Finally, Linda Sue spoke. "You're really going through with this," she said. "Not a question. Just a statement of fact that needed acknowledging." Raymond nodded. "I gave my word," he said. "Told Walter what would happen if he didn't return my truck by November 1st. A man's word has to mean something, Linda Sue. If it doesn't mean anything, then what are we? Just animals making sounds at each other." She looked at him across the table. This man she'd married in 1970 when he'd come home from Vietnam, damaged but trying, who'd given her 5 sons and built a life in these mountains through sheer determination and hard work, who'd never raised a hand to her or his children, who'd been a good father and husband and neighbor for almost 3 decades. And now he was about to become a mass murderer. "You know what this means," she said quietly. "You'll die in prison, Raymond. You and all 5 of our boys. I'll be alone. Our grandchildren will grow up visiting their fathers and grandfather behind bars. The Macklin name will be poison in this county for generations. Everything we built, everything your father and grandfather built, it'll all be destroyed. For a truck. For respect." Raymond finished his coffee, stood up, walked to the window that looked out over his 80 acres, the land his grandfather had cleared in the 1920s, the barn his father had built, the sawmill Raymond had operated for 30 years. "I know," he said. "I've thought about all of that. Spent the last 2 weeks thinking about nothing else. But I keep coming back to the same place. What kind of man lets himself be stolen from and disrespected and does nothing? What kind of father teaches his sons that you can be walked on and you just accept it? I tried doing it the right way, Linda Sue. Asked politely 11 times. Gave a clear deadline. Offered to forget it all if Walter would just return what he borrowed. He chose differently. He chose to keep what's mine and mock me for caring. So now I choose." He turned to look at her. "You could leave," he said. "Pack a bag. Go stay with your sister in Little Rock. Be gone when they come to arrest me. Tell them you didn't know, that I kept it from you. They might believe that, might leave you alone." Linda Sue shook her head. "I'll wait for you," she said. "However long it takes, I'll wait. I married you for better or worse. This is worse. But I'm not leaving." Raymond felt something break in his chest. Love and grief mixing into something that hurt to breathe. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Martha Sue," he said. She stood, walked to him, put her arms around him like she had 1,000 times before. "I know," she said. "I just wish the best thing that happened to me wasn't about to throw his life away over a Ford pickup." At 9:30 a.m., Raymond drove into Mountain View, parked on the square, walked into the Mountain View Cafe where he'd eaten breakfast every Saturday for 20 years. He ordered as usual, 2 eggs over easy, bacon, hash browns, white toast, coffee black. Sat in his regular booth by the window. Harold Jenkins, who ran the hardware store, stopped by his table. "Ray, how's that sawmill running?" Raymond looked up, managed a smile. "Running fine, Harold." "Getting ready for winter? Stocking up on firewood orders? You?" Harold shrugged. "Slow, like everything else. But we're surviving." He moved on to another table. Raymond ate his breakfast slowly, tasting nothing, watching people move through the square, going about their normal Friday activities, buying groceries, going to the bank, living lives that would continue tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, while Raymond's life ended and 16 other lives ended, and Stone County changed forever. At 11 a.m., Raymond drove to his oldest grandson's school, Timbo Elementary, where 8-year-old Clayton Jr. was in 3rd grade. Raymond had called ahead, told the secretary he needed to pick up his grandson for a dentist appointment, a lie that came easy because what was one more lie when you were planning 16 murders? Clayton Jr. came out of class, excited to leave school early, climbed into Raymond's truck, chattering about a science project and a girl he liked and whether they could stop for ice cream. Raymond drove to Dairy Queen, bought his grandson a chocolate-dipped cone, sat with him in a booth watching him eat it, memorizing everything. The way Clayton Jr.'s hair stuck up and back, the gap in his front teeth, the splash of freckles across his nose. Everything Raymond would think about in prison when he was 70 and 80 and dying and trying to remember what his grandson had looked like before Raymond destroyed everything. "Grandpa, why are you looking at me funny?" Clayton Jr. asked. Raymond smiled. "Just thinking how much you've grown, buddy. Seems like yesterday you were learning to walk. When can I go hunting with you?" "You promised." "Soon," Raymond said, knowing it was another lie, knowing Clayton Jr. would never go hunting with him, would grow up visiting him through plexiglass and learning to hate the grandfather who'd thrown his life away over a truck, and respect and codes of honor that meant nothing to people who hadn't grown up in these mountains. Real soon. He took his grandson back to school at 12:15, watched him run across the playground toward his friends, turned and drove home through November drizzle, hands gripping the steering wheel, jaw clenched against emotions he couldn't afford to feel. Not yet. Not until this was over. At 2 p.m., all 5 sons gathered at Raymond's house one more time. Final meeting, final check of plans and equipment and resolve. They went through it methodically, clinical, each man's assignment, each target's location, each escape route memorized. Marcus and Daniel would take Dale, Prichard at his trailer on County Road 22. Joseph would handle Michael Prichard from a concealed position on the ridge behind Michael's house. Clayton and Thomas would eliminate Robert and James Prichard at their shared property. Raymond would take Christopher Prichard at Walter's compound, then Walter himself last, making sure his cousin understood exactly why this was happening before he died. The 4 extended Prichard cousins would be handled after the primary targets were down, cleanup operations to ensure no witnesses remained. Timing was critical. They'd begin at 11:30 p.m. Saturday night, hit all locations simultaneously within a 30-minute window, be finished by 2 a.m. Sunday morning. Then they'd go home, clean their weapons, and wait for the law to arrive. "Any questions?" Raymond asked. Thomas spoke up, the youngest at 26, still trying to find moral ground to stand on, in a situation that had no moral ground. "Dad, what about the women and children?" "Dale's got 2 kids. Michael's got 3. We going to eliminate them too?" Raymond shook his head firmly. "Women and children don't matter," he said. "This is between the men who stole from me and the men who took that theft personally. We don't touch wives, we don't touch kids, we don't go into houses where children are sleeping. We wait until targets are isolated, outside, separated from innocents. That's the line we don't cross." Marcus looked at his father. "Dad, we're planning to eliminate 16 men. We're already crossing every line that exists." Raymond met his son's eyes. "Some lines matter more than others, Marcus. We're doing what needs doing to men who wronged us, who disrespected us, who refused every chance to make things right. But we're not monsters. We don't hurt innocents. We don't traumatize children. We do this as clean as possible, quick as possible, and we live with it afterward. That's the code, twisted as it might be." At 4:30 p.m., the sons left, each to their own homes, each to spend final hours with wives and children, before becoming murderers, before throwing away their futures for their father's honor, for a borrowed truck, never returned, for respect valued more than life itself. Raymond stood on his porch, watching them drive away. 5 sets of taillights disappearing down his gravel driveway. 5 men he'd raised to be good and decent and law-abiding, about to commit the worst crime Stone County had ever seen, because he'd asked them to, because family loyalty ran deeper than law or morality or fear of consequences. The sun set at 5:47 p.m. Temperature dropped to 38 degrees. Fog began rolling down from the ridges. Saturday night was coming, bringing with it blood and horror and the end of everything the Macklin family had built over 4 generations in the Arkansas Ozarks. 11:23 p.m. Saturday, November 8th, 1997. Temperature had dropped to 36 degrees Fahrenheit. Fog rolled through Stone County hollows, thick enough that headlights barely penetrated 20 feet ahead, turning the world into something dreamlike and unreal. Perfect cover for what was about to happen. The moon was a waning crescent, providing almost no light beyond what stars offered through gaps in clouds. The only sounds were wind moving through bare branches, distant barking of dogs, chained outside trailers, the occasional hoot of an owl hunting in darkness. Raymond Macklin sat in his 1976 Dodge Power Wagon, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, parked on an old logging road, 300 yards from Walter Prichard's compound. Through the trees ahead, he could see the yellow glow of a security light mounted on Walter's barn, could see the silhouette of his 1989 Ford F-250 parked exactly where it had been for 16 months. The truck that had started all of this. The borrowed property never returned. The symbol of disrespect that was about to cost 16 lives. Raymond's hands were steady. He'd expected them to shake, expected some physical manifestation of what he was about to do, some signal from his body that this was wrong, that he should turn around and drive home and let the law handle it or let it go entirely. Instead, he felt nothing but cold purpose, the same focused calm he'd felt in Vietnam before an operation. That ability to step outside yourself and become something other than human, something that could do terrible things without hesitation, because hesitation got you killed. He picked up his Remington 700, checked that a round was chambered, confirmed the safety was off, breathed the cold November air deep into his lungs. This was it. The point of no return. After tonight, nothing would ever be the same. 11:47 p.m. Marcus and Daniel Macklin sat in Marcus's 1993 Chevy S10, parked in darkness 200 yards from Dale Prichard's trailer on County Road 22. Dale was 28 years old, Walter's oldest son, married to a woman named Jennifer, father of 2 kids under 5. Worked at the lumber mill in Mountain View when they had shifts available, used Raymond's borrowed truck to haul firewood he sold for extra money. Through binoculars, Marcus watched the trailer's windows, saw the blue flicker of a television in the living room, saw Dale's silhouette move past, waiting for the right moment, waiting for Dale to come outside, to separate himself from his family, to give them a clean shot that wouldn't endanger his wife or children sleeping in back bedrooms. At 11:52, Dale's front door opened. He stepped onto the small wooden porch, wearing a UK Wildcat sweatshirt and jeans, lit a cigarette, stood there smoking and looking out at the November night, completely unaware that 2 men with rifles were watching him from darkness, completely unaware that his father's decision to keep a borrowed truck had sentenced him to death. Marcus raised his Browning bar, found Dale in the scope, center mass, easy shot at this distance. Daniel whispered, "You sure about this?" Marcus didn't answer, just exhaled slowly and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the November silence. Dale fell backward against his front door, cigarette falling from his hand. Inside the trailer, Jennifer started screaming. Marcus and Daniel were already moving, running back to the truck, engine starting, headlights off, driving away on the old logging road, before Jennifer reached the door and found her husband dead on the porch. 12:03 a.m., Sunday, November 9th. Joseph Macklin lay prone on a ridge, 300 yards behind Michael Prichard's house near Timbo. His grandfather's Springfield .03 rifle resting on a bipod he'd made from branches. Breathing controlled, eye to the scope. Michael was 32, Walter's second son, father of 3, worked construction when he could find it. His house sat in a clearing, 1 story, lights on in what Joseph knew was the kitchen. Through the scope, Joseph watched Michael moving around inside, saw him open the refrigerator, pull out a beer, pop the top, waiting, patient. The way his father had taught him to hunt deer, you don't force it, you wait for the animal to present itself, to move into position where the shot is clean and certain. At 12:17, Michael stepped out his back door onto a small deck, beer in hand, stood there drinking and looking up at stars visible through gaps in clouds. Joseph adjusted for windage, elevation, distance. 300 yards was a long shot, but not impossible. Not for someone who'd been shooting these mountains his entire life. He found Michael in the crosshairs, held steady, breathed out slowly, and squeezed. The Springfield barked once. Through the scope, Joseph saw Michael fall, saw the beer bottle shatter on the deck, saw the kitchen light still on, saw movement inside as Michael's wife came to see what the noise was. Joseph was already packing up, moving down the ridge in darkness, using trails only locals knew, heading back to where his four-wheeler was hidden. Engine that would get him out of there before anyone could respond. 1 down. 15 to go. 12:28 a.m. Clayton and Thomas Macklin approached the property where Robert and James Prichard lived together. 2 brothers sharing an old farmhouse on an unnamed gravel road off Highway 66. Robert was 30, James was 27. Both worked odd jobs. Both had been seen driving Raymond's F-250 around Stone County, laughing about it according to witnesses who'd reported back to Raymond. The house was dark except for one window where lamplight showed. Clayton and Thomas moved through trees surrounding the property. Combat tactics Clayton had learned in Desert Storm, staying low, using cover, making no sound. They reached the edge of the clearing, saw Robert's truck parked out front, saw James's motorcycle under a carport, waiting. At 12:41, the front door opened. Robert and James came out together, both carrying rifles, both dressed for deer hunting, heading out for an early morning hunt, taking advantage of the hours before dawn when deer moved most. They walked toward Robert's truck, talking quietly, breath steaming in the cold air. Clayton and Thomas stepped out of the tree line simultaneously, rifles raised. Robert saw them first, started to bring his own rifle up. Clayton fired twice. Robert fell. James tried to run, made it maybe 10 steps before Thomas's shot dropped him in the gravel driveway. Both brothers lay in front of their shared house, dead before they understood what was happening. Killed by neighbors they'd known their entire lives over a truck they'd borrowed without permission. Clayton and Thomas stood there for maybe 5 seconds, looking at what they'd done, then turned and disappeared back into the forest. 2 more names crossed off a list that still had 12 more to go. 1:14 a.m. Raymond Macklin stood outside Christopher Prichard's trailer behind Walter's main house, waiting in fog so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. Christopher was 24, Walter's 3rd son, unmarried, lived alone in a trailer that had belonged to his grandmother before she died. Raymond had watched the trailer for 30 minutes, seen Christopher moving around inside, seen shadows against curtains, waited for him to come out. At 1:27, the trailer door opened. Christopher stepped out wearing boots and a heavy coat, heading toward his truck parked 20 yards away. Probably going to check on something. Maybe heard the distant shots that had been echoing across Stone County for the last 2 hours. Maybe getting nervous. Raymond stepped out of the fog. Christopher saw him, stopped, recognized Raymond even in darkness. "Mr. Macklin, what are you doing here?" "Your father stole from me," Raymond said quietly. "You and your brothers used what he stole. Tonight, that debt gets paid." Christopher's eyes went wide, understanding flooding his face. Oh God. The shots we heard, that was you, that was. He tried to run. Raymond's Remington barked once. Christopher fell in the gravel between his trailer and his truck. 24 years old, never married, no children, dead because his father had borrowed a truck and refused to return it. Raymond stood over the body, waited for guilt or horror or anything human. Felt only emptiness, like something inside him had died the moment he'd made this decision. And what was left was just going through motions, completing a task, crossing names off a list. He turned toward Walter's main house, saw lights on, knew Walter was awake, knew he'd heard the shot, knew he understood what was coming. 1:38 a.m. Raymond walked up the steps to Walter Prichard's front porch, rifle in hand, didn't try to hide, didn't try to be quiet. The front door opened before he reached it. Walter stood there, shotgun in his hands, face pale in the porch light. Behind him, Raymond could see Walter's wife, Sarah, cowering in the hallway. How many? Walter asked, voice shaking. Raymond met his cousin's eyes. 8 so far. Your sons, Dale, Michael, Robert, James, Christopher, your nephews from your brother's side. 8 men dead because you couldn't return what you borrowed. Walter raised the shotgun. You're insane, Ray. You killed my boys over a truck. Over respect, Raymond corrected. Over you giving me your word and breaking it. Over you mocking me when I asked for my property back. Over you teaching your sons they could steal from a Macklin and laugh about it. I gave you 16 months of chances, Walt. Gave you a clear deadline. You chose this. Walter's finger moved toward the trigger. Raymond was faster, had been expecting it, had 40 years more experience with violence than Walter did. The Remington spoke once. Walter fell backward through his doorway, shotgun clattering on hardwood floor. Sarah screamed, ran toward her husband's body. Raymond stood in the doorway looking at his cousin, the man he'd known his entire life, the man whose grandfather and Raymond's grandfather had cleared these mountains together, the man who'd broken a promise and paid for it with his entire family. Raymond turned and walked away, left the door open, left Sarah crying over Walter's body, left behind 52 years of family connection, severed by a borrowed truck and broken word. 2:43 a.m. The 4 extended Prichard cousins died quickly, efficiently, systematically. Marcus and Daniel found Thomas Prichard at his deer camp near Marcella, sleeping in a tent, killed him before he woke. Joseph tracked down William Prichard on a logging road where he'd pulled over to sleep in his truck, one shot through the driver's window. Clayton and Thomas eliminated Edward and Samuel Prichard at the old mining area near Rush, caught them both outside a cabin they'd been renovating. 16 men dead in 3 hours and 20 minutes. 16 lives ended over a 1989 Ford F-250, over broken promises and disrespect and mountain codes of honor that valued reputation more than blood. By 3:30 a.m., all 5 Macklin men had returned to Raymond's property, parked their vehicles in the barn, carried their rifles inside the house. Linda Sue was waiting in the kitchen, coffee made, face empty of emotion. They sat around the kitchen table where they'd planned this, where they'd crossed the line from law-abiding citizens to mass murderers. And nobody spoke, just drank coffee and waited for dawn, waited for discovery, waited for the machinery of justice to come grinding toward them. Raymond looked at his 5 sons, saw the weight settling over them already, saw the knowledge of what they'd done beginning to sink in past adrenaline and cold purpose, saw them becoming men who'd carry 16 bodies for the rest of their lives, who'd die in prison decades from now, still seeing the faces of cousins they'd killed, still hearing their mother crying in the next room, still wondering if protecting their father's honor had been worth destroying everything else. 6:15 a.m. Stone County Sheriff Thomas Bradford received the first call, voice panicked, reporting a body on County Road 22. Before he could respond, another call came. Then another. By 7 a.m., he had reports of bodies scattered across 12 miles of mountain terrain. By 8:30, Arkansas State Police had been called. By 9:45, FBI Special Agent Rachel Morrison arrived from Little Rock, took one look at the pattern. All Prichard family, all killed within hours, all hunting rifles, and understood immediately this wasn't random violence, wasn't drug-related, wasn't anything she'd seen before. This was execution, systematic and planned. By noon, body count reached 16. Morrison stood in Walter Prichard's driveway, looking at Raymond's F-250 that had started everything, feeling sick. At 2:30 p.m., law enforcement approached Raymond Macklin's property expecting standoff, found Raymond and his 5 sons sitting on the front porch, weapons laid out on the ground, hands visible, waiting. Sheriff Bradford got out of his vehicle. Raymond stood. "Tom, we did what needed doing," Raymond said. "We're ready to answer for it. No resistance, no drama, just quiet acceptance." Trial came in January 1998 in Little Rock. 80 counts first-degree murder. Defense argued honor culture, economic desperation. Prosecution showed planning, coordination, premeditation. Jury deliberated 14 hours. Guilty, all counts. Raymond got life without parole, died in prison, March 2019, age 78. His sons got 40 to 60 years each. When asked if he had anything to say, Raymond replied, "A man's word used to mean something. His property used to be sacred. I did what my father would have done. No regrets." But the question remains, where is the line between defending honor and becoming a monster? The answer haunts Stone County still. Until next time, remember, monsters aren't born, they're made. One broken promise, one borrowed truck, one mountain code, honored past sanity at a time.